Let's talk herd. Hi, Ren. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you. I thought it would be nice to start with where it all began for you, because it always really interests me that, whether it's a kind of slow process of awakening or whether it was a revelation or, how did you get to where you are now, really?
Hmm. I have changed a lot since the
Mm,
beginning with horses. I was raised in a really traumatic household and got
okay.
access to horses when I was 12 years old, but I had been introduced to them in my earlier years and allowed to ride when I was younger. But I got my first horse when I was 12,
Okay.
and I channeled all of that trauma into my relationship with my
Mm,
horses and riding. And at the time, I would have seen that as a positive thing. And I've come a long way from that in the years since learning how to address trauma and moving into what my work has become, which has very little to do with horses at this point.
mm,
Um, but I mean,
okay.
as a kid growing up in rural Texas in a really like tumultuous environment, I went from the extreme, like rodeo side of things, all the way through the natural horsemanship movement when it came about,
Mm,
and then into the more energetic based
yeah.
work. And then now I've moved completely beyond
Okay.
manipulating captive dependents for my own well being.
Mm, yeah. Yes. So, would you say it was a spiritual kind of journey, like a more of an inner understanding? Like, how did you become aware the way that you are now?
Surrendering to pain, which I do believe is very spiritual. But I didn't grow up in a privileged
Mm,
way, so that like there wasn't a lot of thinking about spirit. It was all survival when I was younger. And
mm,
surrendering to pain
yeah.
is what taught me what I've learned.
Okay. Is that a specific thing that you want to share or not? Like was there an experience that you remember, or was it more of a just a practice that happened?
It didn't start out as a practice because, as I said, I didn't come from privilege. So practices, methods, things like
Mm.
that weren't really accessible. It was more like a moment of,
Yeah, I kind of meant that wasn't really the right word.
yeah,
Yeah, I sort of more by yeah, just kind of meant like just something like a habit, I suppose, is a better
no,
word
it
for
was
it.
more like a total just relinquishing because I was so overwhelmed by pain and
Okay.
heartbreak at the time.
Yeah.
And because I was studious in my like horse, evolution, I had learned a lot. And so I was
Mm.
able to put the two together and recognize what the horse's biofeedback
Okay.
was offering me as a response to this deep surrender, and how there was this moment with the stallion I was working with where when I dropped fully into my body, he was untrained and not in a
Mm.
very deep state of learned helplessness on any level. And so he was a really dangerous animal to be working with.
Okay.
And when I was fully in my body with him,
Mm.
there was this instantaneous cooperation, but I was not unaware of my influence over him due to his
Mm.
captivity. And so it all just kind of came together. And in this moment of recognition and deep physical surrender. And then I built
Mm.
from that through practice
Yeah.
and creating a body of work around that.
Okay. Yeah. Just when you were describing that, it reminds me of an article I read about a matador, actually. I'm not, I'm not sort of relating that what you were doing to that, but he was with a bull in the arena, and I think he was injured, so he couldn't move, and it was the moment when the bull just didn't attack him.
Yeah.
It had the chance to kill him, and it just didn't. It did not. It stood there, and he was just like, he just had this complete revelation, like, what am I doing? And it's really emotional, actually touching. It's a touching thing to feel into someone's moment like that. And I think now he's like an activist against
Hmm.
obviously bullfighting and that whole world. So yeah, it's really powerful, those times.
That is a comparable experience. It's
Yeah.
like when we drop fully into surrender and allow universal energy and
Mm,
intelligence to move through us, we have a very different experience of who and what we're relating to.
mm,
And that's the way we're designed
yeah,
to relate.
absolutely. So, in a sense, it was an emotional journey. Like it was about how it felt for you to work with the horses, and training became something that just felt wrong.
Well, it didn't feel wrong. The relationship to emotion changed so that it was no longer a relationship
Okay.
to seeking something positive and instead being a conduit to the full spectrum, which is how an animal lives. That's how an animal lives in a very grounded spiritual
Mm,
place. And so what
mm,
happened is it matured my emotion, matured my relationship to emotion, and allowed this judgment of right, wrong, good, bad, whatever to be replaced with physical discernment, the way a wild animal relates to the world around them.
that reminds me, the way that you're talking about it, a little bit of the energy work that I do, or I've kind of become aware of this ability in myself. I think we all have it. And it is something that animals never really lost, and they never shut down, or it wasn't shut down in them
Mhm.
by their life. And yeah, and I think it's incredibly powerful. And I wouldn't my personal opinion is it's not the same as emotion. It's like it's kind of like a world, like a dimension that you can tap into. So I would say what I do with, I don't know if I could use the word do, but my relationship with my horses now is through that energy. That's how we communicate, and and it's like and the changes are vibrational.
Mhm.
Like it feels like the changes that are being made are in that vibrational way. So what would you say? So you said you're not working much with horses now.
I still have
Is
20
that
horses in my
because
care.
you just, okay, yeah. And do you, so you feel that that relation, like having horses domesticated in that way, is just something that's completely, what's the word? Um, Archaic, or it's not quite the word I want, but like it's in the past. It's something that's no longer appropriate.
Well, I don't think we've reached that paradigm as a species yet, but you named it. This interruption that humans have from that way of allowing free flowing energy is only there because of domestication. The
Mm,
trauma of domestication, both in our
yeah.
own domestication and that which we perpetuate on others, that keeps us separate in that way. And then we have to rely and depend upon external means of a regulation, usually in the form of privilege
Mm,
of some type, including taking advantage of captivity to have access to that. Very few people I know have access to that on an ongoing basis without exploitation, without taking
mm,
advantage of an improper power dynamic, without money in the bank,
mm,
without codependent relationships. There's a lot of external things that allow people to tap into that, but it's more than each of us having an ability.
mm.
It is who we are when we remove all of those obstructions.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of feel like this world as such is essentially an illusion. I know people say that a lot, but it's, for me, it sort of feels secondary. Like that I do think we're changing the world. Like that's our, I don't know about our purpose, but that's the kind of reason for being in this and playing this game in a way. So I feel like sometimes we get a little bit too attached to how it looks here.
Mm-hmm.
Like animals being at different animal species and people's different lives, like that it matters whether somebody's rich or not rich or poor, in terms of possessions. And I feel like the answers are always just to go a little bit back to source and just come out of the illusion a bit. What do you feel about that?
Well, I feel
Like,
like most people use their mind to create even more illusion than the illusion you're speaking to. And that's
mm,
what I was naming when I'm talking about privilege and things like that. We're talking about nervous system regulation. And I believe that the body is conduit for this universal intelligence that is primary to the illusion of
mm,
our mind. But we don't have consistent, sustainable access to that source running through us when we are fooling ourselves with our interruption of other
mm,
people and beings' emotional access to their own divine source. And so when we take advantage of
yeah,
captivity and when we do the things that we do to each other, we can really easily slip into spiritual
mm,
bypassing because it's very easy to know these things when we tap into them through externalized regulation.
mm. So are you talking about projection, like that we tend to project onto others things that we don't like in ourselves or things that we haven't
I
resolved?
wasn't speaking to that, but that's certainly true.
I'm just trying to kind of make it a bit more. How do you help people? Like, do you think it is your purpose or your duty? And these are probably totally the wrong words, but like, do you think that you've got a role here in changing
I
others?
think each of us has a ever unknown unfolding role, and the only way to truly be aligned with purpose is to live so fully in your
Mm,
body that your subtlest yes and no can be felt and experienced. And the only way to have access to that kind of guidance is
okay.
to become emotionally mature. And we can't become emotionally mature while taking advantage of something outside of ourselves that we depend on for our own emotional regulation. And so my purpose is not predefined in concept or through my own decision making. It is known and followed
Mm,
through a very subtle intuitive guidance system that I now have access to beyond domestication.
okay. So, do you feel that you're accessing that all the time, pretty much?
I have the agency to. I
Do you have a practice, like a pattern or a way that you do that to make sure that you keep coming back to it?
Yeah, my practice is my body of work that I call Sanctuary 13, and it is 13 principles to make sure
Mm,
it keeps you really honest in a really
yeah.
painful
Can you
way.
describe that a little bit?
Sure. And it eliminates the possibility of projection. It eliminates the possibility of exploitation. It's just a set of principles that when you operate within the
Okay.
container they create, you are forced to face the truth of what you are actually doing, and you can't convince yourself otherwise. And then you have immediate
Mm,
access to all.
yeah. How did you develop those principles? How did they come to you? Like, how did you formulate them into?
Well, I can't answer that for sure because I didn't have a lot to do with it other than getting out of the way. But the part that I did play is I was a very skilled, successful, energetic horse trainer. So I reverse engineered that process and removed all of the elements of exploitation and an abuse of power between a guardian and their dependent. And so I really began a deep dive into understanding the nature of trauma and where it comes from and what it is and how when we take advantage of somebody's dependent place in our lives, we keep our own trauma swept under the rug and perpetuate trauma onto the other, even when we can make it look all beautiful and positive and dancy and spiritual and energetic. I was
Mm,
masterful at manipulating the dependents in my care. And so I just reverse engineered that process. And I just sat one day with nature and asked,
Mm.
what are the elements of this in a practical way that I could then share with others? And I just started writing and wrote them down.
So what was the first one?
The first one,
Like what's the first principle?
uh,
Are they in order?
they're it's
I
arbitrary because
imagine they
they're
got
a mutually inclusive body of work. So you can't pick and choose,
okay.
or it's not like that. It's they all have to be in
Mm,
place at the same time to result in the last one, which is
okay.
the surrender to feeling everything. But within the first
Okay.
12 are all of the accountability and personal responsibility elements that come with being a mature human
Mm,
animal so that you can have the right relationship to your own nervous system to be able to access that depth of feeling.
mm.
But it would take us much more than the hour we have to start to unpack the principles. That's why I wrote a book about them. Like, they're very, very nuanced and conceptual.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's difficult when you do a podcast because I think for people to truly connect with something, they have to know more about it. But then again, it's hard to go into great detail, obviously.
Well, I can give you an example.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, carry on.
The key is to remove the abuse of power and really understand what our
Mm,
responsibility is to a dependent in our care, rather than seeking a dependent in our care to support us. It's a reversal of those roles, which is the natural way we are designed to support emotional development.
mm,
And when, as a dependent, we are used to regulate or provide something for our guardian, that is the essence of domestication and the essence of the interruption that goes unresolved in our
yeah.
own, emotional trauma. And so at the end of the day, it's remove all of the exploitation
Mm.
from the equation and learn how to relate without controlling and without using. And so my cat just came in and is curious what we're doing.
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I love it when the animals are there. So it's kind of like
Very much.
becoming aware of your intention and aware of your
And removing the
expectations.
expectations, because a
Yeah.
dependent in our care owes us nothing.
Yeah. Would you say that? How do you bring that out of the head and into the heart? Like, what's the process? Is it more of a rational, logical thinking about it? Would you say, or is there more of an exercise that you have, or how do you help people to become aware of what their expectations are? And
The logical, practical aspect of it is the principles themselves in their practical
mm,
application, which include things like removing all forms and systems of reward and punishment. So
yeah,
no training whatsoever. And what do you do when that's
mm,
been removed? It's the education and the learning happens through the
yeah,
practice of it, not through
yeah,
listening to me. I can help people along, I can
mm,
support them, I can fill in some blanks, but it's energetic exchange when all of those, seemingly benign systems of control are removed, you're left with nothing but yourself. And you learn very quickly the nature of the relationship when all elements of manipulation have been removed.
yes. And yeah, I understand that process. Um, I feel like talking personally with my horses, we don't use like equipment anymore. Um, and yeah, I think it does, it changes everything. Like it changes. I'm just thinking of the practical, like, because a lot of people aren't really, I suppose they just have to change their situation. But yeah, it can be
I
complicated.
mean, this turned my entire life upside down. It's super complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this morning I had an experience with, there's one of the mares in the herd that I look after who because she gets sweet itch in the summer, and she comes and stands in the barn on her own quite a lot. And so I often go and just we scratch together and stuff. This morning she wanted to come out and graze just outside of their territory. They've got quite a lot of land, but she just saw that grass out there, and so it was like, yeah, I did actually open the gate and let her out, but I just feel like it is complicated. It would be so much easier if, they were wild animals, and we just like connected in that way in that situation. But there are like physical things that come up, physical issues.
Well, a lot of the physical issues are a biofeedback demonstration of the unresolved emotional issues in the primary caregiver. And I think if people would learn how to see that in their animals, they'd understand a lot is
Mm,
possible by just being responsible for our own emotional, like
yeah,
free flowing ability. Usually, when a horse presents a physical ailment, it's deeply tied to an unresolved trauma in the caregiver.
yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, you mean her sweetish? Yeah, she's actually this year. She's a lot. It's a lot more balanced. And yeah, I totally agree with you on that because they're all I'm really kind of natural about it. I don't believe in any kind of medication and all that kind of stuff. And we do everything energetically. And they've been like super healthy horses for like maybe the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of it, and I do a lot of it, I totally take responsibility that it is our relationship that allows that. And yeah, I feel that, yeah, I suppose I was sort of
Hmm.
bringing that up because it was bringing stuff up for me. Like this thing of it just feels so awkward that the horse is behind a gate and that like it's up to me whether I open it or not and whether I consider that safe. And because obviously the situation that we're in, I can't just, it's not like, yeah, you could say, well, just open, I can't open the gate and let them all run out up the road. So it's like, it is a sort of, there's an awkwardness about it, I suppose.
Well, and the more clear we get of this is the paradigm we live in, and we don't have to continue it, we don't have to perpetuate it. I mean, I'm not going to have horses once my herd is gone, but we do have to accept things as they are to create emotional congruence so that the horses
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
have
Absolutely.
problems as a result. Because when we, as their caregivers, get wishy washy around, oh, this is bad. Why are we doing this? It shouldn't be like this. If we get too tumultuous around that, it will lead to
Mm,
physical issues with them because they need congruence from their leader. And we are
mm,
their leaders because of their captivity. And a big part of the work is coming to terms with the real nature of this relationship is between captor and, and captive. And when we can come to terms with a lot of emotional freedom can happen even within the confines of captivity.
yeah. I definitely feel like, for me, what feels really good to me is the work that we do vibrationally. Like, for example, recently we've been working on, and I don't know if you would consider this just me, but I was feeling the power of the horses, just the vibration of that, and how we as humans we have quite a fundamental fear of that, I think. And I when I feel these things, it's in energy, so it's not like really coming up to the mind level at all. So when I felt this, I felt like the first thing I had to do about this power was heal all the trauma in my body that's been caused over my life from that horsepower, obviously without any blame or anything attached to it. It's just like from falling off and from getting kicked and stuff like that. And I felt like I did that over a few days to the extent that it was clear enough that we could then sort of move to the next phase of it, which was giving the power back to them. Because I felt I had quite a sort of profound experience recently where I really felt the way that we've put our oppression onto the horses. So that's why we have to control them, because we feel that we control ourselves, like we've oppressed ourselves, our own power. So this was like a kind of just the sort of next stage of that. And this process of giving the power back to them is really powerful. It's a really powerful feeling. Like, it's like at first I felt like they were diffident about it, like they, didn't necessarily want to take it back. But I think that was more about whether it was just some kind of jaded feeling that there was there, which resolved itself. And then there was just the feeling of them being really curious and really alive and super present with it, with the sense of that. So anyway, that's what feels good to me in this whole thing, that it's not necessarily going to change the physical paradigm tomorrow. Like, I don't know how, if it'll be in my lifetime or probably not, but I feel like we're changing things vibrationally. And that's like, I feel why we're in this situation together. So I'm not too concerned about, like, I don't worry about the fact that they're captives as such, other than the awkwardness, like that happens occasionally, because I feel like they can't have the stimulation that they would have if they were wild animals. So that is obviously
Is that true,
a
though?
concern. But so how,
I said,
say
is
that
that true
again?
that they can't have the same stimulation as if they were wild? And what determines wild? Environment or emotional maturity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I went just literally from watching wild horses. And yeah, they do have a very I mean, they've got a very I think I would say they really enjoy their life, but they can't wander in the way that they would if they were, they can't just kind of be free, and there's that element.
What determines freedom? Physical limitation or emotional freedom?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think one
Because
reflects.
that kind of freedom is conceptual.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suppose it doesn't
They
really
don't
matter.
judge that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel that they miss anything. It's more something in my head because I know that that
Mm-hmm.
exists. So yeah. Yeah, but what I was coming around to asking you, the very long question, is how do you feel like is your work with other people? Is that what feels like your work?
I feel like my work is with my soul. And because I live in my body the way a wild animal does, and that's what my work is about, is returning to that. I'm intrinsically guided moment to moment. I'm not egoically predetermining what I'm supposed to do. I'm listening and responding, and I have ideas, but I'm always willing to shift them. And living in that ever unfolding unknown is terrifying for most people. I've been living off the grid
Mm,
for 6 years in this little shack, taking care of these animals and doing whatever my yes indicates for me to do. And by and large, most of the people I work with and encounter would never want to do that because of how scary it is. They choose the comfort that comes from the exploitative paradigm we are currently inhabiting. And I agree with you. At the end of the day, none of it matters.
mm,
Um, and it also does. And so I like to live in the both and grounded reality of, yes, we are very much primarily these spiritual beings, and we are also rooted here in this earth paradigm. And there's a lot to play with there.
Mm.